Today's April 29th in the year 2003. I'm Karen Herman with the Archive of American Television, and it is my great pleasure to be interviewing Carol Burnett in Brentwood, California. Okay, we'd like to take a few minutes to get some of your background information. What was your name at birth?
My name at birth was Carol Creighton Burnett. The Creighton was my mother's maiden name.
Did you have any nicknames growing up?
I had no nicknames growing up that I can repeat here.
When were you born?
I was born April 26, 1933.
Happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
Where were you born?
I was born in San Antonio, Texas.
Is that where you grew up?
I grew up, I went through the second grade in San Antonio, and then my grandmother, who was raising me, and I took a train and came out to Hollywood, California, where my mother was, so that we could be with her. She and my dad had divorced. And so I grew up a block north of Hollywood Boulevard, but really a million miles from Hollywood, you know. And that was my neighborhood.
Were you interested in the movies and Hollywood, per se, at the time?
We were, my grandmother and I were on what they call relief at the time, you know, the WPA and all of that. So we didn't have a lot of money, but what we did do with anything that might have been spared, we would take that money and go to see 8 movies a week. We saw 4 double features every week. Of course, back in the covered wagon days, when I was a little girl, I got in for 11 cents, and my grandmother got in for 26 cents. So that's that was when and also we'd get there before the prices would go up. So we'd always go before 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekend, or 6 o'clock in the evening during the week. Otherwise, the prices would go up, and we'd have to wait.
Did you have any favorites?
My favorites were Betty Grable movies, the musicals. Betty Grable was a top star for 20th Century Fox, and at one time the most popular movie star in the world. And she was the pinup girl for all of the soldiers and sailors and Marines in World War II. She was just wonderful, and I loved her musicals. I loved the MGM musical, mostly musicals. And then there was James Stewart, who was my favorite actor growing up because he reminded me of my dad. And the neat thing is that years later, I got to know Jimmy Stewart and his wife very well. They were very good friends. And Betty Grable was a guest on my television show, which blew my mind, you know, to have my idol to be a guest on our show.
When you were watching those films, did you have any inkling that you wanted to go into entertainment at the time?
I had no inkling that I was going to be an entertainer until I went to college, really. I wanted to write. My mom always, she was a writer. She wanted to interview movie stars and write about them. And she did do a few freelance articles. And so she interviewed Rita Hayworth, who was a screen goddess at the time, and Bob Hope, and people like that. But she never really got a steady job. But I liked to write, and I was the editor of my junior high and Hollywood high school newspaper. And also I thought I would be a cartoonist. And I would write my own cartoon strip. So that's what I did. I thought I was going to be. And then I went to UCLA and majored in theater arts English because then I could take the playwriting courses. But when you major in theater arts, you have to, as a freshman, take everything that they offer. You have to be in a scenery class, you have to be in a costume class, you have to take lighting, sound, and acting. And I was scared to death to get up there, and then I did a scene with one of the guys in class that was a comedy scene, and I got laughs, and I felt wonderful. I felt something that I had never felt before, even when I was cartooning or writing or doing a lot of other things. It was this freedom. And I think maybe when I was growing up, my girlfriend and I, Isla Mae was her name, when we would see Betty Grable movies or Tarzan and Jane or so forth, the neighborhood kids, we would all get together and reenact those movies. But all of us did that. So that was part of growing up. And then we'd go roller skate down the street, But so that was really the only time I'd ever performed. But it was, coming, well, okay, we just saw a movie, let's go pretend we're those people. But to really actually get up and do something, it wasn't until college. And then the bug bit.
Were you considered funny as a child?
I don't know if I was funny as a child. I was pretty much of a nerd. I was a good student and pretty quiet in class, and I did my homework and got good grades. And I remember when I did start to get on television for the first time, I would get letters from kids I'd gone to school with, and they'd say, "We can't believe that was you." So probably I wasn't that funny as a kid, or I was quiet, kind of shy.
Did you sing as a child?
I would sing as a child with my mother and my grandmother in the kitchen. Mama played the ukulele, and we'd do old tunes and standards and stuff, and I would do the lead and they would do the harmonies, but not too performing wise. It was just, just kind of harmonizing and stuff. So when I was at UCLA and had done this comedy scene, one of the students approached me from the music department, and he said, "Can you carry a tune?" And I said, "Yeah, I can carry a tune." So they were doing a scene from South Pacific, and they cast me as one of the nurses in the moment when Nellie Forbush sings, "I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair." So I was singing with all the others, and I got real loud. So he came up to me, he said, "Would you do a scene with me from Guys and Dolls, and would you sing Adelaide's Lament," which was the song that Vivian Blaine introduced in the original. And I said, "But sing alone, a solo?" And he said, "Yeah, you don't have to sound good because in this song she has a cold." So I figured, oh, okay, I can do that because then, if I hit a clam or a wrong note or something with the throat wrong, I could blame it on the fact that this character has a cold. So that was the first song I ever sang. Then I thought, that's really what I want to do is musical comedy. So it all just kind of happened.
Did you know how to read music?
I still don't know how to read music. I can, on our show, I would get a script and I would have the lyrics on the page, and then I would make little squigglies on everything. Does it go up here? I'd make a little arrow going up here, down, and I had my own hieroglyphics that was my music, and I could read that very well. And I would just listen, and I have a good ear, so it was simple to do.
Do you remember the first time you saw television?
First time I saw television was we had a TV set. My mother lived across the hall from my grandmother and me in the same building, and Mama got a TV set, a little black and white, about that big, and she would watch. There was a guy named Corla Pandit, who wore a turban and had a jewel in the turban and these very sexy Omar Sharif eyes. And I think he played the organ, and he would look like this, and that was it. And then there was another one called the Continental, where the man would talk to the camera, and he would make love to the camera as if you were on the other end of this. I think Christopher Walken did a takeoff on that character on Saturday Night Live a few times. And so Mama would sit there and, have a drink or two with the Continental. So those are the first things I remember.
Did you ever imagine yourself being on television?
I never imagined that I would be on television. My goal was the Broadway stage and nothing else. And I got a chance to go to New York, which was rather out of the blue. I had gotten into this musical comedy class at UCLA, and we would get graded on our scenes at the end of the semester. And so the professor invited the 9 of us, there were 9 of us in the class, down to a party in San Diego. And he said, you'll be the entertainment. It was kind of a black tie thing with a dinner dance. And he said, you guys can be the entertainment. Come to the party, and I'll grade you there. So we all drove down, got down there, and I did a scene from Annie Get Your Gun. And so afterwards, I was at the hors d'oeuvre table, and I'm putting hors d'oeuvres in my purse to take home to my grandmother and my mother. And somebody taps me on the shoulder, and I thought, I'm busted, you know. And it was a gentleman and his wife, and they said they really liked the scene a whole lot. And I said, thank you very much. And he said, so what do you want to do with your life? And I said, well, someday I want to go to New York and be on the stage in musical comedy. He says, well, why aren't you there now? And I said, well, I can't. I was working part-time at the Iris Theater on Hollywood Boulevard in the box office, making a hot 75 cents an hour on weekends, you know. I said, it's going to take me a while to save up. He said, I'll give you the money to go to New York. And I thought, whoa. And his wife says, no, he means it. And he said, you be in my office a week from Monday morning at 9 o'clock, and I'll write out a check for you so that you can go to New York. So I went home and borrowed a car to get back down there the following week. And he said, this is for you to do what you say you want to do. It's a loan. I want you to pay me back, no interest, in 5 years if you are successful. He said, and there are other stipulations. You never tell my name. And if you are successful, you must promise to help other people out. I said, okay, and he gave me a check for $1,000. Now, you know, as I said, we were on relief, and you know, and I was making 75 cents. I'd never seen that many zeros in my life. I couldn't believe it. I got home and cashed it, and I showed my grandmother all this cash, and she said, you can't go to, you know what we could do with all that money? And you know, I said, I have to, because that's what he gave it to me for, you know. So I left and went to New York. Quit school my sophomore year, and I'd never been any further east in Texas. And I didn't know a soul in New York. I didn't know, I didn't know enough to be scared. And so my buddies at UCLA gave me a party, and they said, so what are you going to do when you get to New York? What's going to be your first project? I said, I'm going to be in a show, a musical comedy, and it's going to be directed by George Abbott. And then we all went, yay, yay, yay. George Abbott was the primo musical comedy director at the time, and had been for many, many years. And he was quite a man. It happened. It happened a few years later, but that was my first show, Once Upon a Mattress, and it was directed by George Abbott. So weird things, but I don't know. I'm just grateful that I was so stupid, you know, that I could just get up and go and think everything was going to be okay. I didn't know enough to be frightened and put up barriers or be cynical at all. And I think the movies had a lot to do. Mickey and Judy, you know, those movies had a lot to do with it, because I was raised in an era when the movies usually had a happy ending, and they were kind of simplistic. And I believed in all of that. And I think that helped me.
Did you ever see that couple again?
I saw the couple again. Actually, 5 years to the day, I paid him back with a certified check. I also wrote them when I was on the got booked on the Ed Sullivan Show. Never heard from them. And then years later, when I was doing my own show, the wife called me in the office, and she said, we'd love to see you. Do you ever get down this way? And I said, I will make it a point. So my husband and I drove down to San Diego and had lunch with them at their club. He was always very kind of quiet, the gentleman that gave me the money, and we had a lovely lunch. And as we were walking back to our cars, his wife, the Mrs., said to me, he never wanted to take credit for anything. She said there were many times when we would be in a place or you'd be on television and people would be commenting or laughing or something, and he would just sit there and we'd look at each other and smile. And he passed away. But I am still in touch with his wife.
Now, how did you fulfill that third promise of helping others?
Well, I have, when he said, you must help others out, the third stipulation, I started scholarships at UCLA in musical comedy, another scholarship in acting at Emerson College back east, and then I have a journalism scholarship at the University of Hawaii. And then personally, some other things, when I see somebody maybe needs a break or a chance or whatever, if it isn't necessarily money, it can be a good word for them or write the recommendation for them to get into a particular school or whatever, so I try to do that too.
Have you ever done it anonymously, the way it was done for you?
I did an anonymous thing once. It was a school. There was a private school that I'd been looking into for one of my daughters. This was years ago, and it was terrific. But she didn't want to go to that one. But I thought, this is really a lovely school. So we called up, my husband and I called up some people that run camps in New York for underprivileged children. And we said, send us some information about some of these kids, what are their grades, what kind of a kid is it, and what's the situation at home. And we picked this young man who got C's and B's, but only because he couldn't, he had to work, and so he couldn't really concentrate that hard on his studies. His mother had a bunch of kids. And they were very, very poor. And we sponsored his high school education. And he went to that school and started to get A's.
Now, do you remember the first time that you appeared on television?
The first time that I appeared on television was, I think I did something out here when I was at UCLA. It was like an amateur thing, but I can't really remember what it was. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. But one of the first that really stands out in my mind was Omnibus. And that was when Leonard Bernstein was hosting it. And I walked in and sang, belted out a song. And he came up to me and he hugged me and he said, "You're on next Sunday." And I did a song from Dewberry Was a Lady with the powdered wig and the whole 9 yards. And it was called Give 'Em the Ooh La La, which had been an Ethel Merman song, I think.
How were you introduced on the show?
I don't remember how I was introduced. I don't even think they say, and here's so-and-so to sing this. He was talking about musical comedies, and he says, and this was a song from Dewberry Was a Lady. I think we were probably listed, the cast at the end, in the credits, but I don't believe I was introduced.
Another show that you were on was the Winchell Mahoney Show.
I was on the Paul Winchell Kitty TV show, and I debuted in that on December 17th, 1955, I think. And I auditioned, and Paul gave me the job as the girlfriend of the dummies. And I remember my grandmother, I called her to tell her I was going to be on this show. And she said, well, say hello to me. And I said, Nanny, they're not going to let me say hello to you on television. I didn't. But I had some friends who would pull their ear for their son, their little boy, whenever they were on television. They were a dance team. And I said, Nanny, I'll pull my ear for you. So that's when that started. I just kind of casually do that, and that was hello to her. And I did that ever since. Every time I was on TV, I'd find a place to do this when I was on camera so that she would know I was thinking of her.
Was it only on TV?
Yeah, it was only on television because she was in California and I was in New York. And no, I didn't go around pulling my ear just just for the heck of it.
What else did you do on the Winchell Mahoney show? Were you doing comedy at all?
I
on that,
didn't
or?
do too much comedy on the Winchell Mahoney show. I was basically like a sidekick, and I'd sing. In fact, the first song that day that was Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which was very serious, that I sang to one of the dummies. And it was mostly singing. Yeah.
How long were you on the show?
I was on the show, maybe a few months, I think. Yeah.
Did it do anything for your career?
It did not do too much for my career, I don't think, but yes, in a way, it gave me a good training. Paul was wonderful to me, and so I learned an awful lot just being around it, but I still, my goal was theater. And Mattress came 2 years after the Paul Winchell show.
You also worked on a show called Stanley.
I worked on a show called Stanley. I think it was the only live sitcom ever to have been done. And it was produced by Max Liebman, who had done your shows and so forth. And that was starring Buddy Hackett. And I came in and auditioned for the role of his girlfriend. And that was good training because it was live. And, well, back then, most everything was live. Ed Sullivan was, and I did that show. But again, I kept saying, no, it's got to be theater, got to be theater. And so when I got the role of the princess in Once Upon a Mattress, she was this gangly tomboy from the wrong side of the tracks. I did that, and then in the same year, I got cast on the Gary Moore show as a second banana. And then I started to realize I kind of like this television because I was able to do sketch comedy as opposed to being in a sitcom where you're the same person week after week. I could be different people in this 1 hour, wigs, costume changes, so forth. And it was always different every week so that I never got bored. It was always very exciting. And I realized that variety, musical comedy variety, was really what I liked. And it took the Gary Moore show to show me that.
Okay. Before the Gary Moore show, you'd been on Jack Parr's Tonight Show?
I was on Jack Parr's Tonight Show, and I did a number called I Made a Fool of Myself Over John Foster Dulles, which was written by Ken Welch, with whom I still work. I still work with Kenny and his wife, Mitzi. He wrote this song, and it was about a young girl. It was during the Elvis Presley craze. And so Kenny thought it would be very funny if he writes a song about this young girl madly in love with, not Elvis, but John Foster Dulles. Now, John Foster Dulles was a Secretary of State and was very serious. He was aptly named, too. I mean, people say he was very dull. And very, I don't know, uptight and, whatever. And so the audience went nuts when I came out on stage at the Blue Angel nightclub. And I sang I Made a Fool of Myself over John Foster Dulles and, about how sexy he is and so forth. So Jack Parr asked me to come on and do it on his show on a Tuesday night. And I did. Went back to the Blue Angel to finish the second show, and the phones were ringing off the hook. And one of the phone calls was from Mr. Dulles's television advisor, a man named Waters. And he said, "You think you could do it again on the Parr show because Mr. Dulles didn't see it?" I said, "Fine by me." So they booked me again Thursday night. So I went back, did it again, and then Ed Sullivan booked me on Sunday. So I did that song 3 times in 1 week. And the following Sunday, I was at home and I was watching Meet the Press. And Mr. Dulles was on Meet the Press and, all very serious talk about the world situation. And finally, at the end of the show, one of the reporters said, or the interviewers said, "Now, Mr. Dulles, before we leave, tell us about what's going on between you and that young girl that sings that song about you." And I'm going, "Oh my God." And he got a twinkle in his eye and he said, what did he say? "I make it a matter of policy never to discuss matters of the heart in person or on television." And I was so cute. So I figured, wow, he does have a sense of humor.
Did you ever meet him?
Never met Mr. Dulles, no. We had this long-term, long-distance relationship.
You mentioned that it was the Elvis craze, and I guess on the Ed Sullivan show you appeared on the same show that he did. Did you
I
meet him?
appeared on Ed's show a few times, and one of the times was when Elvis was on. I think he was in the Army at the time. And so I did get to meet him, and I got an autographed picture from my kid sister. And she still has it. He was very sweet.
On to the Gary Moore show, which you started talking about. How exactly did you become a regular in the cast?
I had done Gary's show as a guest at one point, and then Martha Ray got sick. She was going to be on the show, and Martha Ray got ill with bronchitis. She was a very funny, wonderful comedian. And that was on a Sunday, and Gary's show went live on a Tuesday, and I got a call. And they said, "Can you come in and learn the part?" Because, it had all been written for Maggie. So I went in, learned the numbers, and learned the sketch that she was supposed to do, and went on Tuesday night. And Gary did the nicest thing. He explained to the audience that Martha was ill and that they had called me on Sunday at the end of the show, and when he brought me out for a bow, and it was just, so dear, and the audience was very receptive. And so the following week, I got a call about possibly being on every week, and that was just great. So I got off unemployment and got all that wonderful experience and a regular paycheck.
Let's stop there to change the tape.
Okay.